Thank you. Looks like we still have about 100, well, maybe not quite 100, but still, thanks for being here. We have a lot to get to today as usual. Let's go over the schedule. Okay, today is the 24th of September, which means we're in the middle of this fifth week, because that's off by the week. I still have to say that. We're in the middle of the fifth week. Today we will finish up social interaction and possibly start groups and organizations. We'll see where we are. We have one more class before the exam. It's 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where we are after today. And then the next exam is on Monday. Any questions about the schedule? Okay. So, this is where we left off, I believe. Let's review a little bit about what Goffman was talking about. Who'd like to remind us what the dramaturgical approach means? Yeah. Well, that's correct about the dramaturgical approach. That's what Goffman said. The dramaturgical, some of the discussion about the dramaturgical approach. But in the bigger picture, what does dramaturgical approach mean? What is the analogy? Yes. That society is the theater, and then we're all actors in the stage, and as you saw in the video, you got the idea from Shakespeare, right? And the masks that the actors and actresses wore. Is everybody clear about what he meant by masks? Who can remind us what masks mean in that discussion? Yes? Yes. Right. The presentation of self in everyday life, the name of his book. The masks represent how we present ourselves in different social situations, in different social interactions, right? And then you got the part where he said, when we're not interacting with people and we sit alone in the room, so to speak, we don't have any self because it's a reflection of the interactions we're having. And again, you don't have to agree with that. You just have to understand what he meant. Any questions about, yeah?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what was the book called again?
Presentation of self in everyday life. It was on, yeah, sure. It was in the video and it was also on the slide. Presentation of, there's a couple of books we're going to talk about in this class from Goffman. But that's the best known one, I think. Presentation of self in everyday life. Okay, so if we're actors and actresses in the theater, there has to be an audience, and I think this is where we left off, right? So we should start here again. So if there's an analogy, so he said this is what we do in real life too, right? Not just in the theater. We do this every day. I think I said that's the beauty of God. He analyzes things that we do every day that we don't realize, and then we point it out to us. We go, yeah, we do that all the time, right? Like civil intention and all those other things. So, did I give you the real life example of how this would look with the emails? No? Okay. You see a friend from high school. You haven't seen that person in a while. They say, let's keep in touch, but I want to send you something. I want to send you some tips. I know you use text, but just play along. I want to send you some things. I need your email address, right? Everyone here has a New Albany email address, and everyone here, I'm pretty confident, also has a personal email address, right? Gmail or something like that, right? That you sure. This friend from high school who wants to send you some pictures and stuff, would you give that person your UAlbany email address or your personal email address? Your personal email address, right? Because that's your informal self. If you said to me you wanted to read more about Goffman, like that would never happen. No, it has happened. And I said, okay, just give me your email address and I'll send you some stuff. Which one would you give me? The school email address,
right? Because that's the formal role that you play in this interaction, right? And that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it really should be. So that would be an example of the front stage and the backstage in real life. Any questions? When we first talked about the sociological perspectives, we talked about how certain sociological perspectives maintain social order. Remember that? For example, how does conflict theory maintain social order in the mind of conflict theory? Never think back. Yes?
Or radical form of change.
That's how they thought conflict would be alleviated. But how do they think that social order was maintained? Yeah.
Domination.
Through domination of those who had the greatest resources, right? Political, economic. So social order is always in the mind, on the mind of a sociologist, depending on what sociological perspective they're in. And again, what sociological perspective is this chapter about? This material on social interaction about? We started out the first slide talking about it. Yes. What's that? No, that was the last one. Yeah, that was cool. Well, that was good. Yes. Symbolic interaction, right? Sense of self, right? Micro-sociology, all that stuff. So, and Goffman, you should know, is a symbolic interactionist as well. So how is, you know, what did Goffman use to evaluate social order? Oh, we haven't talked, okay, I thought I saw we were talking through it. But you read about it. How did Goffman evaluate whether there was social order or not? I mentioned we have an exam on Monday. This is right out of the chapter. I take the chapter, I start making the slides, and then I make some adjustments to it. That's really how this works. What did he use to evaluate or find evidence of social order? Which have little like prizes, you know, they can throw into the audience when somebody gets an answer right, but I don't have. You can have an empty knockoff AirPods case. Anybody know the answer? Without any prizes? Because it might help you on the exam. Yes. Good try. Anyone know? Civil inattention. I thought we had covered it, but here it is. What you read about, right? Use the practice or the concept of civil inattention. What's going on in this picture that I created with AI? This is my big AI accomplishment. What's going on here that would give you some information about civil inattention? You're crossing paths, right? And what does that have to do with civil inattention? Well, at the moment they are, right? That happens all the time. Passing people in the hallway, passing people in the street, and later on we'll talk about elevators and things like that. But what did he say civil inattention meant? That would help a lot in understanding what's going on here. Yes?
It's like when you pass by somebody and you're like, you know, indicating that you recognize, like you acknowledge them, but like you're not too intrusive about it.
Okay. So they're at the point where they can make eye contact or acknowledge each other. Very exciting AI stuff. And what happens? Goffman said when people are in these situations and they are civil, they acknowledge each other, right? So civil, meaning they acknowledge each other. Then there's a social contract that says, after we acknowledge each other, we can go and become inattentive. We don't have, no one has to feel like they have to continue the interaction if they don't want to. But what happens if you have somebody, see if I can do this. And they don't make eye contact. You looked at the person, you're in that place, right, where they cross paths, right? It's not like you're looking to make eye contact with somebody way down the hall, right? But when there's a natural opportunity, and you are a civil person, and the other person either just looks down or goes out of their way of not making eye contact with you, because there are people that don't feel comfortable with that, right? What happens? Yeah.
I think people would probably in the awkward situation just because like stare at this.
Yeah, it's a violation of the social contract, right? You're a nice person, you're civil, you want to demonstrate that you're willing to acknowledge somebody, maybe nod at them, right? Not much more than that, either eye contact or a nod or a wave or something. Not a conversation. Conversations are a different topic, but that's what this is all about. So Kaufman believed that when people do make eye contact or acknowledge each other in some way, that is evidence or the lack thereof of social order. Any questions? Seriously, guy? Excuse me. What are you doing? No, you got to put that away, or I'll step outside. Well, put it away. No, not on the desk. Speaking of lack of social order, is everybody clear about that? Okay. You don't have to write this down, everything on this slide, but what you do have to write down is that they tested this in elevators, not just on the street, not just in a hallway, but they actually, University of Rochester researchers did research in elevators. And what they did was, they would put somebody in the elevator to test certain responses. So in a couple of cases, they had somebody go in the elevator, and you're in there, you're facing out into when the door opens and people get on, and the person they sent in didn't make eye contact. And they had somebody else evaluate what the response of the person was. And then what they did was the opposite. They put somebody in the elevator who was making continuous eye contact, multiple attempts at eye contact. And what happened then? How do people respond? How do you respond if somebody, what's the right amount of time to make eye contact with somebody? It depends on chapter 4, right? It depends on how you were socialized. That's where you learned it. Because every one of us probably was in an elevator somewhere when you were a little child, and you were staring at that adult right next to you, right? Because you didn't know any better. And your parent, it's not nice to stare, or don't stare so long. And that's how you learned it, right? And that was it. And then you learned that you're not supposed to just keep looking at this person. So they sent in people to make multiple attempts at eye contact, and they evaluated what people's response was. And what is the usual response when somebody is stared at for too long? They feel uncomfortable, right? They try to look away, or they try to get out of, maybe they get off the elevator a little earlier than they would have normally and get on another one. But that's what this test was about. So it can take place in a lot of different situations. And they found just what they expected, that people like brief acknowledgement, and then they go back to their phones, or they go back to their newspapers, or they go back to their conversation with somebody else or something like that. Okay? Any questions about civil inattention? Okay. So another thing that Goffman pointed out in this, again, we're still talking about presentation of self in everyday life, this book, and his dramaturgical approach, right? Still talking about that. And he refers to another situation as unfocused versus focused interactions. Can somebody tell us what those mean? Yeah, sure. So right now, this class is currently in an unfocused interaction. You may have acknowledged each other when you came in. You may recognize other people, maybe even come in together. So there was some civil inattention going on, or not. But I think even at this point in the semester, now in the 5th week, if somebody sat down in this class who you hadn't seen before, you'd probably notice that they were new, right? Because you're aware of each other. You may even acknowledge each other. But there's no active interaction going on except for the students who answer questions or ask questions with the conversation with me. Now, of course, if we were in a smaller class, we could have little breakout sessions, or if we were on Zoom, we could have little breakout sessions, but this is a lecture class, so we really don't have that. So, bless you. So, this is an example of an unfocused interaction. However, if I were to say, for example, the exam on Monday, I'm going to change the rules. Instead of each of you getting the grade you've earned individually, I'm going to change it, so I'm going to take the average for the entire class, and I'm going to give everybody that grade. And then I wave goodbye, and I'll say, I'll see you on Friday. What do you think would happen to this unfocused interaction? Because normally you just, when I say it's time to go, generally speaking, I see everybody just, they leave. There's nobody, unless you know the person, you're not really having a conversation. Yes? Right. Right. Probably there would be a change in the dynamic. Probably somebody, at least one person, would engage in what he referred to as an encounter. That's not the, necessarily the kind of encounter you might think just in general vocabulary. In Goffman's vernacular, he says, for there to be an encounter, there has to be an opening. An opening is when somebody breaks the ice. So generally speaking, in this class, unless I call on somebody or somebody asks a question, no one in the class usually starts a conversation outside of that, right? Generally speaking. If I said, we're going to change the rules drastically, and I left the room, I'll say, I'll see you next time. Somebody is going to stand up and say, can we talk about this, right? Can everybody just wait a minute? Let's have a conversation about this, right? Somebody would do that. Maybe more than one person, but somebody would do that. They would break the ice of the silence that usually takes place. And they would start what he referred to as an encounter. And then this unfocused interaction that we usually have would turn into a focused interaction, because people would be engaging in interaction. But Goffman also said that during these encounters, it's important to recognize that there are both verbal expressions or verbal cues that people give. So let's say he stood up and said, when we talk about this, and you said, well, how many people are going to be ready for the exam? And a bunch of people said, yes, I will, using words, right? But then you're watching them, and you notice that the nonverbal expressions that go along with it don't match the verbal expression, right? The people that say, yes, I'll be ready, are looking pretty nervous. They're looking around because they don't even know what the textbook looks like, right? They're like that, right? Like, oh, do you have the textbook? Can I see what it looks like? Those kinds of things. And that wouldn't match the verbal expression. So he said it's very important to be aware that there are verbal expressions and nonverbal expressions. They give the verbal expressions, they give off the nonverbal expressions. Any questions about that? Yes?
So Irving Buckner was the first person to say nonverbal.
No, he wasn't the first person. He was the one in this book that emphasized that that's very important in the interaction, right? Because if you want to understand somebody's, what they're saying, he said it's important not only to listen to them, but also watch their non-verbal cues that they give off that sometimes it's slow. Any questions? So, speaking of nonverbal communication, that's like my best joke of the semester, nobody got it. Speaking of no one got it? Finally, he gets it. There should be like a roaring laughter at that point. Okay. I guess the exam's gonna be a little harder now. No, just kidding. Nonverbal communication is discussed in the chapter. So many more minutes. All right. The textbook talks about the predicted percentage of all human communication that is nonverbal. Does anybody remember from the reading? What percentage of all human communication is thought to be nonverbal? Are you guys answering now nonverbally? Is that what's going on? You all got it right, but I'm just not recognizing the cues that you're giving. I'm giving off. Who'd like to say it verbally? That is literally the best joke I have all semester. What percentage did the chapter talk about? It's about 93% of all human communication is thought to be nonverbal. So there's a lot going on that researchers believe at the microsociological level is not always observed. So this includes things like facial expressions, which we'll talk more about in a minute, gestures, overall body language that people use to gain additional information. That's why emojis and those kinds of things are so popular, right? Why do we like them so much? Because if somebody says to you in person, who has plans with you for the weekend, that you're looking forward to seeing some movie or going someplace with this person or some people, and they say, you know, look terrible when you see them, and they go, oh, look, I feel very sick, and you see them coughing and sneezing, and they say, you have no doubt in your mind that they're really sick, right? Because you see it non-verbally, including the words that they use verbally. But if somebody texts you and says, I can't make it, I'm not feeling well, you know, you probably believe the person, but you don't see anything. You don't get any nonverbal cues. But if they put a sad face next to it, you go, oh, he put a sad face. They must really be sick or feel terrible about it, right? Because we get that nonverbal additional information because we're constantly looking for that. That's why they're so popular, right? Happy face, sad face, all that kind of stuff. Makes us feel like there's more information. Paul Ekman is a very well-known researcher in the area of what he refers to as micro-expressions. Paul Ekman came up with the facial action coding system a long time ago. And in fact, I think the first time he really got any notoriety about it was during the O.J. Simpson trial when he was looking at the witnesses on the stand and trying to point out what they were really saying instead of what they were saying, verbally. And you would think at this point that with artificial intelligence and computers being better than they were back then it would become obsolete. But the truth is, this is the basis of what they use to program a lot of the computer-based analysis of expression. So he says that there are 7 universal, that means all people, micro-expressions. And here they are. And we'll see some examples of this. Disgust, anger, fear, sadness, happiness, that's 6 or 5, disbelief, and contempt. And it can be in some combinations. But the point is that he believes that his system can identify these expressions when they happen very, very quickly. So quickly that they may be 1/15th to 1/25th of a second. So you have to look quickly. But he's come up with a system that can identify these with some great accuracy. And then now they're put into computer systems. And he believed that the way to, now analyze this was through the face, which he believed was the best way to identify these things. Any questions? This, by the way, is why your parents could always tell when you were lying when you were a child, right? Because they could read your face. They didn't need that. They could just see the expressions of your face, even if they were very quick. Well, they were, yeah, sometimes they were often. Okay. So I'm going to show you some pictures of what these might look like, and I'll give you one, and then you can see if someone wants to try to pick out the other ones. Now, these are going to be still shots, so they're going to be a lot easier. You're not going to have to, watch the quick motion of the face. I mean, I could show you that too, but this is just, I think this is more enjoyable. So, I'll give you a minute. Any questions? Yes.
I mean, although the facial action itself,
I think you got those right
but you wouldn't be able to use that in like the same actual trial just because.
Well, yes and no. If they call him up as an expert witness, he can testify that he's an expert and that this is consistent with certain type of questions. And then the other side can cross-examine him into validity, right? But he has a reputation as an expert, so he couldn't be used in the trial as an expert. It wouldn't be absolute testimony, it wouldn't be fact, but the jury would hear that and make the conclusion. So yeah, it could be used in the trial. Just in certain ways. Any other questions? And he's not the only expert, too. I mean, there are lots of other people. But he's the one that came up with this first. Anybody else? Okay. So this is one that's a combination of a couple of different micro expressions. So this one is surprise, which is a combination of several of those. And this, this is just for you to get some idea. But let's see if what micro expression do you think that this is one of the 7? The rest of them are all part of the 7. Who thinks they can come up with what this one is? Yeah. The same? Disbelief. Anger. Yeah, anger. I mean, you can interpret it, but this is what he would say. And again, you don't have the benefit of watching his face move. So, all right. How about this one? Yeah. Fear. Yeah, you got that one right. Anyone else? In the back there. Disgust. Good job. All right. Good job identifying somebody with a look of disgust. How about this one? Happiness. Okay, and one more. This one's not that easy. All right, so raise your hand. Who wants to? Yeah. Contempt. Good job. All right. You've seen this before? You're good at this. Maybe you have a career in this field that you didn't realize. All right. So these are the kind of things. But again, he's going to look at them in real, in real motion, in motion. Really, what he's looking for are things around this part of the face, the little folds on the side of the mouth, right? Those kind of things usually move very quickly and give off information. But this is what it looks like when it grows, when you freeze the picture. Okay, so how accurate is facial recognition? Well, as I mentioned, his model is used as the basis, but now cameras are attached to things, and use logic. And the belief is, when they're properly calibrated, meaning that they have the original pictures as the basis for their algorithms, to verify things, the belief is that these systems now can be 99.97% accurate. So what is this used for? Now, obviously you asked a reasonable question about could it be used in a trial. It's really used a lot in marketing research, right? I don't know if they still do this. You can tell me if this has happened to you recently. But before COVID, there used to be people standing outside the door, just inside the doors at cross gates with like clipboards and an ID. They were all upfront about it. And then, let's say on Monday they go, well, we are supposed to get like three college-age males to ask questions, to do a questionnaire today. And then tomorrow would be 3 females, and the next day would be 3 adults, that kind of thing. Maybe 1 or 3. Did anybody ever get stopped when you walked into cross gates with somebody with a clipboard like that and say, we want to ask you to fill out a questionnaire, we'll give you a couple bucks? They may not be doing that anymore. They used to do that pretty regularly. And they would take you, I know this sounds weird, they would take you in a room, but it was all, it was all really well labeled. It wasn't anything spooky about it. But I did it one time just to see what it was like. Because I guess that was the day that they were looking for people like me. So they take you into this room and they show you a movie trailer or a commercial. And they would give you this really long questionnaire. Like they only pay you like $5 or $10, but they would really make you work for it, right? But I just wanted to see what they were doing. So they would let you watch the commercial once, and then they would say, watch it again, and then they would say, when the main character came out, what were you thinking? And when the secondary character came out, what were you thinking? At the end, what were you thinking, right? And you're going like, I want to help them out, but I don't remember every second of what happened. Well, when they put you in front of one of these cameras, you don't have to think about it, right? They can say your expression was, 3 seconds in, it was this. And at 10 seconds in, it was this. So it makes your life easier. All you got to do is look at the screen and it reads you're agreeing to this, so it reads your face, and it's able to get all this information very, very accurately. And then they can tell whether they want to go forward with the commercial or want to go forward with the movie trailer or the movie or whatever. Because people have positive, responses or negative responses or whatever they're looking for. So this is very useful in a lot of different ways. Any questions? If they do stop you at cross gates, make sure you check their ID. But it's probably good. But I don't think they may not even do it anymore. All right, last thing. Let me try to find this out. 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 chapters. I don't think I want to go more than 4 chapters, right? The first exam was 2 chapters? Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is we'll finish this up today, and then Friday will be a review day, okay? That way we're not going into chapter 6. Chapter 6 will be the first chapter into the next exam, because I think 4 is about as much as I want to get to, at least when I have one. So we do have some left here. So no methodology is a great Scrabble word, right? Probably a couple hundred points if you can pull that off. Probably not, but you got to pack it on to somebody else if you got luck. Before we talk about what it is, and it's part of microsociology, it's part of symbolic interactionism, it's part of the same social interaction topic, but it's from a different theorist, and it's something else. So before we talk about what it is, let's talk about what it's not. Because of the prefix, there's easy misconceptions about things. So it's not the same thing as ethnography, because it has the same prefix. Yeah, I have to call 5 questions down here. Are you okay? Hello? Are you okay? You all right? Sure, I once had a student that would love to do that. He was leaning up against that pillar, and I would do the same thing. Are you okay every day? Usually you start to do it after a couple seconds, and that was a move, right? And I was getting a little bit worried about it. I was a little bit of a point that I was going to call because he just wasn't. But he was out cold. But I want to make sure everybody's okay. So, not the same thing as ethnography, not the same thing as ethnicity, even though it has a similar prefix, not the same thing as ethnocentric, not the same thing as ethnogenesis. So what is it if it's none of these things? Right? Usually you look at the prefix or the suffix and you go, oh, maybe I can figure it out. Well, these aren't the same thing, even though we're similar. So what is ethnomethodology? Yeah. People make sense of what other people. I mean, thank you, but isn't it easier when you do the reading up front and then talk about it, right? Isn't it make your life a lot easier? Okay, thank you for having good notes. So, developed in 1967 by Harold Garfinkel, another micro-sociologist of symbolic interactions. We didn't talk about him in the first list, but there are always going to be more people that are involved with these kinds of things. And he tried to make sense of common everyday kind of norms in society. Who'd like to play tic-tac-toe? All right, come on down. Do I have a marker here? Yeah, come on down. See if these work. Do it out here. There you go. Do a little bit darker. Ready? Thank you. I win.
What?
I win. I see nothing. Thank you for coming down.
You made a big circle.
Made a big circle around all the boxes, therefore I've captured all the.
Did he cheat?
That's a harsh word. We'll talk about this. Thank you for coming down. So usually this was during COVID days when I did this online. So it said, inevitably somebody would do that, and then I would do that, right? So that, if you couldn't see it there, that's what I just did. So I win. Thank you. I'm 1-0 against you, by the way. I've won lifetime victory against you. What just happened? What's the point of this? Thank you. Thank you for being a good sport, though. What just happened? Yeah. Don't use the C word. We have to analyze this. Let's not jump to conclusions about cheating. Yes.
No. So you technically followed the rules by writing an O, but you wrote an O much bigger, and put the O around the X.
Okay. Well, who else has an idea of what just happened here? Yes. Right. Okay. What does this have to do with ethnomethodology, though? Yes. Well, that's a harsh word, right? It may be true, but it's a harsh word. What just happened is I forced everyone to consider the informal norms of society. Because who thinks they can remember where they learned the rules of tic-tac-toe? No one remembers. You take it for granted, right? Who taught it to you? What age were you? You don't know. Is there a book? Where's the book that says what are the rules of tic-tac-toe? Right? It's common sense. Everybody knows it, but we take it for granted, and that's the point that Garfinkel was trying to make. It is not good for society to live with all these informal norms that people just take for granted. That sometimes we have to make sense of these things and bring them up and have people discuss them. So this would be, I think you would agree, one of the informal norms in society. This attempts to force people into showing how they know the common sense rules of society, otherwise known as informal norms, otherwise known as folkways, which means the ways of the folks. The people just do things, rules of thumb, those kinds of issues. So this is obviously a sort of humorous example, but it addresses common sense informal norms that we take for granted. And there are others that you should have read about and we'll talk about as well. How are we doing? Yeah, we're good. Any questions? Anybody still? Yeah. Yes. Yes. You can answer. You can ask a question. I'm gonna have to ask you a follow-up question. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna give you lots of them. Yeah. Did you read the chapter? There'll be lots of examples. You were supposed to write it. Yeah. Read the chapter. That's good. We're going to talk about several other examples. We're going to play chess. No. Yes. Is he in big circles? It's never happened. That's a good question. I guess I wouldn't put a big X through everything. It's never come up. That's interesting. I think I just assumed that it would be Excellent. Yeah. I don't know. Other questions about FMF? Yeah. Hold on, let me get a little closer. Say that one more time. I would just, sledgehammer it anyway. All right, so it forces people into showing all of you had a response, right? Why? Because you thought you do know the rules of tic-tac-toe, right? But I'm forcing you to address that. How do you know? When did you learn it? Why is that the reason, right? But there's more to it. So this is how Garfinkel wanted to evaluate social order. How did Goffman want to evaluate social order? Through what practice? 10 minutes ago. Yes. With what? No, there was 2 words. Yeah. Civil inattention, right? That's how Goffman wanted to evaluate social order. Garfinkel wanted to use what he called reaching experiments. Want to study micro-level analysis because how would you characterize? Now I got to get back to you. How would you characterize you had a response when I beat you? When I dominated you. What do you think your response was? How would you characterize it? Surprise? Dumbfounded? Oh, okay. So which one of the micro expressions would you surprise? Okay. Well, that's important, right? But that becomes important later. Disbelief? Okay. Good. But that becomes important in a minute. Because we're trying to evaluate, Garfinkel's trying to evaluate social order. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But, right, want to study and how people respond, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But, for example, you asked for some other examples, right? Aside from tic-tac-toe. Taking turns on the phone. How do you think somebody would respond if they were talking to you on the phone and you just kept talking over them? You'd hang up. But why is that not okay? Where did you learn that that's a social norm? You don't know. You probably don't know. It's an informal norm in society. It's not written down anywhere, right? But we know when somebody's breached it. And what's your response to do? Well, your response would be to hang up on them, right? Adjacency pairs. You find them in Price Chopper right next to the Fuji pairs. It's still nothing today. A good friend of mine who went here with me is an accountant. He's a pretty successful tax accountant. And he tried his hand at stand-up comedy for a while when he was living in New York City. And he's a very funny guy, but he didn't go well. It's not as easy as people think. Adjacency pairs mean the socially literate responsive. If I ask you how are you, you say fine, how are you? If I ask you what time is it, you look at your watch or you look at your phone and you give me an answer. don't start giving me a long list of what happened for the last 2 weeks, and I sprained my ankle when I went to the gym, and then I had a bit of a headache, was, drying the room. That's great. You tell your doctor that, you tell your parents that, but the average person just wants to hear you some social. Their response is fine, how are you? And let's move on, right? And when people don't do that, that's evidence that maybe there's not as much social order as there can be. All right, so these are all called breaching experiments, breaching the social norms. Some more, backing into an elevator instead of walking straight in. Before we talked about what you would think if somebody made eye contact with you or didn't, but what happens if they didn't walk in forward? What if they just walked in and backed into it? Right, that would be a little off, right? I mean, sometimes it's so crowded they have no choice, but if there's plenty of room, you probably wonder and have a response to that, right? Because it's an informal norm. Acting like a stranger, or treating someone like a stranger that you know very well. So let's just say hypothetically, you've been up here at campus and you go home for, the next holiday was at, we haven't, Columbus Day, whatever you want to call it, Columbus Day, Indigenous first, whatever, they have a couple days for you, right? So, let's say you haven't been home in a month or two, and you left your room a little bit messy, and then you come home and your mother or your father or whoever wanted to do it, you fixed up your room, it's immaculate, your bed is made, everything vacuumed, everything's cool, and then you say to your mother, great job, and you leave her a tip like you would if you were in a hotel. How do you think your mother or your father would respond in a circumstance like that? Yeah. Oh, I think. What do you think the response would be? You can't even imagine that happening, so no one has any? They usually something, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, I feel like my parents would think it's funny.
You think it's funny? They keep the money?
Probably.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Could be a confused response. Anyone else? There's usually somebody said they would get like smacked in the head or something, for being out of line. But the point is, this is not written down anywhere, right? Violating personal space. We know it. We got a real lesson in it during COVID, more so than usual. But it's not, it used to say stand 6 feet back, but prior to that, it was never written down anywhere. And breaking the rules is death. So it's not cheating, it's breaking the rules. Any questions about breaching experiment or evidence of social order? So why did he do this? Because he wanted to see how people would respond, just like Goffman wanted to see how people would respond. We have 3 minutes, let's skip through it. So he hoped to show the unwritten rules during these interactions and how people behave when these interactions are breached. Is that a reflection of how they behave in other social situations? So you didn't get upset, you didn't get hostile. I've had students get a little hostile because they're competitive. They wondered why I had them go all the way down here, and they thought maybe they were, looked bad in front of the group or something. You had a pretty calm, surprise, or you had a bit of a surprise response, right? Is that who you are in other social interactions generally? Are you pretty calm and, think about things rather than respond too quickly? Did that change since you got to the school here? Well, how did you used to be? Okay. Why did that change here? Is you in class? Okay, well, that's good. The question is, when people respond to these breaching experiments, is that a reflection of how they are in other social interactions, and that is their generally social order. Okay. All right, we actually have some things to do on Friday. We'll start off Friday, and then we will finish up and do review for the exam. That's it for today. Make sure you read chapter 5. Chapter 6 will not be on the next exam. It'll be on the next exam, it will not be on this exam. Come down if you missed anything. See you on Friday.